Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the March Animal Care Wednesday webinar. This webinar takes place the first Wednesday of every month, and the topics each month change for different animal care topics. And this month, we are pleased to have Ben Weinheimer as our speaker. Ben is Vice President for the Texas Cattle Feeders Association, TCFA, headquartered in Armadillo. Ben works with TCFA feed yard members on regulatory and legislative issues and manages several of the association's service programs, including the Beef Quality Assurance Program, Employee Safety Services Program, Environmental Services Program, and USDA-approved Export Verification Program. He is also responsible for the association's research and beef sustainability programs. Ben is actively engaged in the US Roundtable for Sustainable Beef as a member of the board and co-chair of the Indicator Working Group. Weinheimer grew up on a diversified crop and livestock operation in the Texas Panhandle. He graduated from Texas A&M University with a bachelor's degree in agricultural engineering and is a licensed professional engineer in Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. Ben and wife Jennifer reside in Armadillo, and they have 3 grown children and 1 amazing little granddaughter. And before Ben gets started, I just wanted to remind everyone is muted, and so if you have a question or a comment, be sure to type it in the chat box. And then also, after Ben completes his presentation, you will notice a poll come up. There are 5 questions in the poll, and so we ask that you complete this poll to help us better serve you for the Animal Care Wednesday webinar. And so, Ben, I will kick it off to you this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Well, thank you for the invitation to participate in this morning's webinar, and welcome everyone this morning to our discussion and update on the work that the beef industry has been doing in the area of sustainable beef production. And specifically, I know many of y'all's area of interest relates to animal care and animal well-being, so I'll highlight some of those areas where we've embedded some of those topics into our work here within the US Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. So I've had the opportunity to work in this sustainability area for about 7 or 8 years now, as the beef industry has continued to get its hands around sustainability in the more of the modern context, if you will, as opposed to kind of the historic or traditional context where many of our members, ranchers, auction markets, and feed yards believe that they've been living the intent and living the meaning of the word sustainability for a long, long time. Taking that and putting that together with some of these, again, more modern concepts around sustainability is much of what we have focused on in recent years. So as I turn through some of these slides and give you an update in terms of where we're at, I do encourage you to make some notes along the way. If you have some specific questions or comments near the end, happy to hear those and look forward to y'all's feedback and discussion. So the US Roundtable for Sustainable Beef is a true multi-stakeholder organization. It has over 110 members. Now we do gain some members, and occasionally some move on to other things, but for the most part we've had very little member attrition and very strong continued participation since we've formed the organization in its current state. It is encompassing of the whole value chain and the focus on advancing, supporting, and communicating continuous improvement through leadership, innovation, multi-stakeholder engagement, and collaboration. On the right-hand side of the screen there, you'll notice that the members of the Roundtable, which is a wholly voluntary membership organization, it is dues funded based off of those member participants, but today represent about 30% of the cattle in the country through its members, 80% of the beef that's processed, and then approximately 28% of the U.S. consumers, especially as it relates to those consumer touch points through our retail and food service members. The main elements of the supply chain are, as you see outlined here. So we start at the very beginning in the cow-calf sector and the ranching sector, inclusive of feed yards and auction markets that are all involved in the live animal cattle production. We also have then our allied industry partners that support the industry across all of these sectors, the packers and processors, you know, who do the work every day of putting beef, making beef out of the cattle that we've provided to them, and then retail and food service, and lastly the civil society sector, which is inclusive both of our academic and university entities as well as the non-governmental organizations. Just a snapshot here of kind of what the current makeup of the membership is. So as you look at the top end of this slide, the producers are very active in the roundtable, inclusive of our cattlemen's associations at the state level, some of the national cattle organizations, as well as a number of individual members, so individual ranch members, individual feed yard members, and others, as you can see depicted on the slide. The processors and packers there sit right in the middle of that slide. So we have all the major players there when it comes to packing and processing beef in the country. Next, you'll see the retail sector. So heavy engagement by many of the brands that we know and trust that help us market and deliver beef to consumers every day. Allied industry partners, a number of those who provide important and essential services, whether it be everything from financial services to technologies, pharmaceuticals, and so forth. And then near the bottom of the slide is the civil society category that I referenced. So you'll see here several of the university partners that are members, and then a number of the non-governmental organizations, entities like Ducks Unlimited and the Nature Conservancy, just to highlight a couple of them. The Roundtable's organizational structure is very analogous to you know, other associations that have come together voluntarily to provide a service or create a focused activity around a specific subject matter. So we are made up of the General Assembly, which is inclusive of all those members that you saw on that previous slide represented by those various logos. From that General Assembly, we elect a board of directors every year. So it's a 10-member board of directors, 2 board members from each of those 5 sectors of the supply chain. We have administrative support staff. And then as you drop down underneath all of this and see where the real work gets done, it's focused on formation of work groups or specific task force, if you will, that have been assembled to develop things within a defined scope of work within a defined period of time. And I'll highlight a couple of examples of those here in just a few minutes. So today, the board of directors, as example, is represented by these individuals that you see here on the screen. And I should emphasize that it's actually the organizations that are represented and elected as board members, and then they designate the people within their organization to actually speak on behalf of that organization throughout the course of our board meetings and discussions. So again, 2 from each of those 5 categories, all of which then come together each year to then elect a chair and chair-elect. You'll see the current chair is Rickette Collins with McDonald's, and the chair-elect Kim Stackhouse-Lawson with JBS. So just a little bit of perspective in terms of when the organization started, a little bit of the backstory ahead of that, and then highlight some of the key areas that we've worked on here the past few years, as well as what the future looks like and plans going forward. I mentioned early on that I've been involved in these discussions for about 7 or 8 years. So as we first had kind of a global beef sustainability discussion in 2010, it was the first time that we brought all of the stakeholders together to have a focused discussion on beef sustainability, both what it means globally as well as what it means for each of the countries that are significant beef producing countries around the globe. And after that 2010 meeting, that helped result in the formation of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And subsequently then, through the structure from the global then to the country or regional specific beef producing regions, we worked to stand up these country specific beef roundtables. So it was then in March of 2015 that we formed and launched the US Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. We focused initially on bringing all those stakeholders together to identify the kind of the high priority areas, the key areas where all of the stakeholders could agree we needed to focus our efforts on. We spent time after we've identified those high priority areas, then working to develop the baseline type of metrics that are important for each sector to address each of those high priority indicators. And then now our current work focuses on developing assessment guides or guidance type documents to help operations throughout the supply chain implement this work in their specific operations. After we get through these development of these sustainability assessment guides, we'll focus more on outreach and education, much of what many of you on this webinar do day in and day out to help educate the industry and those that are actually in the supply chain day to day, either raising cattle, producing beef, or processing beef, and so forth. So one of the main things that we did early on is to reach agreement amongst all of these stakeholders on what is the actual scope of work of the roundtable itself. Where will it focus its energy, and as important, sometimes where will it not? And saying it another way, what will we do versus what will we not do? And intended both to be delivered in a positive way so that we could focus on those things that we could all agree on and get movement going forward in that direction, and then also stay clear of some of those things that are best left to the private sector, to the individual supply chains to work on themselves. This graphic here illustrates then kind of how we assembled the activities of the roundtable, and lines up with that chronological graphic that I demonstrated a minute ago, where for about the first year, we worked on identifying and agreeing on these high priority indicators. So that's number one that you see on the screen here. We followed that with then trying to bring further definition to each of those indicators for all of the sectors through the development of specific metrics or questions that operations could focus on. And then now we're working on the development of these assessment guides, and then soon to be followed with education, training, and outreach. The other, number 5, arguably could fit kind of throughout this process because of some of the pilot projects that are underway to help kind of evaluate these tools and resources as we're developing them. So as it has become and always is important to kind of test these concepts and get proof of concepts out on the ground, these pilot projects that are underway are helping us do that and providing a feedback mechanism to further improve these indicators, metrics, and assessment guides. And then down towards the bottom of this screen, you'll notice that we have a dotted line, and kind of want to just further demonstrate that while it may be in the best interests of certain individuals within the supply chain to take the work that we've done and implement it at a higher level, they definitely have the liberty and the latitude to do that. But as a roundtable organization, it is not specifically focused on and will not develop a certification program or a verification program as you see here. We're going to leave that in the hands of the supply chain to take this information and then further implement it at whatever level they deem appropriate. Our goal as a roundtable is to provide these resources to all the players in the beef supply chain and let them utilize it on a voluntary basis to help improve their operations. Periodically then, as many of you are aware, we do have a national assessment that was initially published in 2013 and will be periodically republished, reevaluated and republished, and that is the US Beef Industry Life Cycle Assessment. So through that life cycle assessment, we intend to continue to measure and monitor kind of the system metrics for how we're progressing in things like air and water and land resources, employee safety and well-being as a couple of examples. So in line with that triangle type graphic that we just discussed, the early work was put in the hands of the Indicator Working Group. Myself, along with Nancy Lobby with the World Wildlife Fund, co-chaired that work since 2015, and our tasks were specifically around getting agreement and alignment to these high priority indicators, as well as this initial draft of metrics that could be applicable to each sector of the supply chain across all 6 of these high priority indicators that we have developed, and I'll discuss those on the next slide. Since we've largely completed that work, initial work around indicators and metrics, we've handed that off now to the Engagement, Measurement, and Progress Working Group, which is led by Clayton Huseman and Wayne Morgan, and they are focused on developing these sustainability assessment guides as tools and resources to help with implementation. Our 6 high priority indicators that the roundtable agreed to include animal health and well-being, air and greenhouse gas emissions, efficiency and yield, employee safety and well-being, land resources, and water resources. And you can see here on the right-hand side, we put some definitions with those to allow people to have a good understanding of what we viewed as the scope of each one of these indicators. For those who actively participated in the discussion and the development and the alignment to these 6 indicators, it seemed pretty straightforward. But again, we have a number of folks across the supply chain, as extensive as it is, that needed some definitions to go along with these descriptors here that we have in these relative to these 6 indicator areas. So that even as we made our way through that process during the course of the first year, I should have mentioned that we started with about 160 different areas that were put up as topics of importance to various stakeholders of the beef industry. So through that materiality assessment and kind of prioritization of grouping and trying to get agreement on where do we start, that's how we consolidated and landed on those 6 high priority areas. Now, as we moved into, and that process was really done, as a full group across all the stakeholders, the entire supply chain, to get that agreement. As we then get down to the next level of detail regarding the metrics, the sustainability metrics for each sector across those 6 high priority areas, the ownership of that became more and more important that be owned by each sector themselves. So this is where we're getting down into more of the details around what's important to the specific sector, what type of questions do they need to draft or focus on for their sector, and they need to be able to own that and have a willingness to support it and encourage implementation in the future. So these, as you see here, some rules of engagement throughout this metric selection process became very important, where each sector identifies its own metrics for each indicator. They have the opportunity to review and comment on all the metrics, but the ultimate authority, if you will, resides with their metrics for their sector. And that allowed that, that independent yet kind of collective approach to come together and help ensure that everybody worked to develop metrics for their sectors, but also, and had a willingness to accept input from one sector to the other, but ultimately they owned and controlled their own decisions. And that's really helped us with the long-term support. And I think, as I referenced way early in my remarks, it's helped us maintain a very strong and active membership throughout this process, because we really do have a governance structure in place that allows us to ensure that all voices are being heard. I wanted then to just kind of focus on one area here, given the time that we have, and that is on animal health and well-being as one of the main indicators that we selected. And then through these initial metrics that the supply chain partners have brought forward, you'll see here and recognize things that y'all are quite familiar with. In the cow-calf sector, the baseline metric is around our beef quality assurance or similar program principles incorporated into management of the farm or ranch. Similarly, in the auction market and feed yards, as you read those there on the screen, our employees trained in beef quality assurance principles being implemented, whether at the auction market or at the feed yard. So a strong focus and emphasis on the beef quality assurance program, heavily supported by the industry, supported by extension and veterinarians and nutritionists to help us with that uptake and the implementation of that program that's now been around for approximately 30 years, trying to advance the safety and wholesomeness and quality of U.S. beef. And because we have provisions put in place that we expected all sectors to develop some type of metrics that's appropriate for them, you also see here a couple of examples from the packers and processing sector and the retail and food service, where they also have some specific expectations and specific metrics for their portion of the supply chain as it relates to animal health and well-being. Now, I'm not going to take the time to read all of these that are on the screen, but I will kind of highlight for you here, because I think probably as you saw me transition from the previous slide to this one, you notice that there's quite a bit of difference when it comes to the number of words and this kind of different approach that's outlined here. So the cow-calf, auction market, and feed yard sectors very much wanted to start with a very basic but yet important focus on BQA principles, employee training and implementation of those principles. And then the packers and processors have, as well as the retailers, have those metrics for which they focus specifically on their operations. But because they're so far down the supply chain, they also have an interest and willingness to support animal health and well-being for things that are upstream of them. And you'll notice here how that plays out in terms of the various levels, these levels 1, 2, and 3, and a kind of a path even for them to look at how are they focusing on continuing to improve, continuing to support the improvement of animal health and well-being, not just within their specific sector, but throughout the supply chain. You'll see that as example under level 1, those second questions there, maybe the question that's under processor. Does your company have a documented animal welfare policy? And does it also encourage the adoption of the Roundtable animal health and well-being metrics? So again, it's getting all of these parties, all of the segments of the supply chain to align towards a specific focus on beef quality assurance efforts upstream of it. Quickly here as we look forward to some of the things on the horizon. So the assessment guides, the draft of those are nearing completion. We will announce at the General Assembly meeting, so the 4th annual meeting of the Roundtable will be May 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in Oklahoma City. We will announce a public comment period, open public comment period at that time, so I encourage y'all to be on the lookout for that if you have an interest in looking more closely at the detailed content and offering comments and feedback. We welcome that. We'll continue to support pilot projects and other things along the way as we continue to learn throughout this process. These assessment guides, without going into a lot of detail there, you can just see really the concepts behind that. As I used BQA as an example a minute ago, the assessment guides are kind of an approach that allow for a type of feed yard assessment or cow-calf assessment that would be applicable across all 6 of these indicator areas and have some content important for each one of those. But again, something kind of similar to a BQA feed yard assessment, but larger in scope and more encompassing than just animal health and well-being. Pilot projects continue to be supported, so there's some guidelines around that for entities throughout the country who have some efforts that they want the roundtable to endorse or highlight, and so we have a process for that if people are interested in submitting certain project proposals for the group, for the roundtable to embrace and recognize as another means of evaluating the work that we've done so far. I've already mentioned it, but just so you're aware, again, the dates of the 4th Annual General Assembly meeting will be May 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in Oklahoma City. May 1st is an industry tour, followed by about a day and a half of meetings there at the Sheraton Hotel in Oklahoma City. Last slide here, just to wrap up, is just to remind you again of the website, usrsv.org. A lot of information accessible there. Even as you hit the landing page, all of our published work around these indicators and metrics is already available on that homepage for you to review and study, both a brief 12-page design version as well as the larger technical document is there and available for your review. And then it is an open member organization, continues to be that way. There's a very simple online membership form to complete. There's a defined membership fee structure that's outlined on the website. So if you or any other person or entity has an interest in exploring more details or possibly becoming a member, by all means, go to the website and find more information there. I do thank y'all for the time this morning to share some of these highlights, and I look forward to hearing any questions or comments that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Just as a reminder, if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And Ben, I don't see any questions I see one question from Heidi. Did the National Dairy Farm Program's Environmental Stewardship Assessment come about as a result of this, or how did these assessments fit into the USRSB?
So the way that the roundtable defined the metrics, and as I know I went through it fairly quickly there, but the focus on BQA or equivalent programs. So the intent in those areas where the industry, whether it be the beef industry or the dairy beef industry, or however you want to look at how all that fits together between BQA and the farm program, the intent is not for the roundtable to create new programming or new services or materials where those already exist. Instead more about embracing those existing programs that are out there. And with that question, let me just make a mention of a couple of things real quick. So again, going forward, the focus will be on more extensive focus on education and outreach. Also, there will be some work around trying to have a process in place to, I'll say, more formally recognize equivalency of existing programs. So where we can point to those existing programs and look at those and say, yes, they meet the intent, they fulfill the concept of what this metric is striving for. And so we'll have some process put in place around that to allow for that to occur in the future. And then the only other thing, because it does come up on occasion, especially as I represent the feeders, how do we address sustainable feed production? And our focus there is on coordination and collaboration with the Field to Market initiative. We do have a letter of agreement in place between the US Roundtable and Field to Market. We're working to put more definition around that relationship, but we are the beef experts, and Field to Market is made up of the members that are the feed and crop fiber experts. So we want to recognize that and just figure out how best we can collaborate and share information as opposed to duplicate efforts.
We have another question. How is the Roundtable Committee addressing the Beyond Meat movement?
So at this point in time, the roundtable has really just focused on the more traditional beef production in its on the hoof state, if you will, and so as part of that too, it's about any aspect of that type of production. So it's not necessarily selecting one type of production system over another. It's collectively about whatever uh, beef production system people are most willing to engage in and support, and if there's an economic driver to to produce cattle or beef a certain way, and it can be done in a sustainable and both environmentally and socially responsible way, then we encourage the supply chain members to do that. But beyond that, we really just maintain that as our initial focus.
Ben, is this program looking to replace BQA or in addition enhance BQA? What's the thought longer term on this?
So definitely not looking to replace BQA, but yet, as we illustrated here, as a way to incorporate the BQA programming and efforts as addressing one of these key areas. So definitely one of the main important areas was this area around animal health and well-being that was identified as important across all the stakeholders that came together to identify those priorities. But then in a similar way, to utilize whether it's existing programs that are out there, or if somebody needs to work on something new specific to their operation in a similar way, like the other areas. So like employee safety and well-being. So a focus on existing employee safety programs that are out there, or the need to develop some of those if there's some gaps there. Environmental management. When you look at the fact that we have 3 environmental indicators on water, land, and air, there's a ton of information and resources and programs out there focused on assisting, especially cattle operations, with their environmental management practices and activities. And to the extent that those existing programs, just like BQA, can kind of feed into the roundtable activities and fulfill that expectation of what's needed for that specific sustainability indicator, then by all means we want to encourage that and support that.
I'm not sure if there's any other questions coming through the chat. I don't see any at this time. Hopefully everyone can see the poll that is on their screen. There's only 5 questions, and we ask that you take a couple of minutes or a minute or 2 to complete the poll. Ben, I don't see any other questions at this time, so I want to thank you for your time. Do you have any final comments?
My comment would be to just be sure that if you're interested in learning more, visit the website. Feel free to reach out to me directly by phone or email. I included that on the slide at the very start of this presentation, as well as you look at the website and scroll through the membership, there are a number of current members scattered around the country. So if there's somebody that you specifically want to reach out to for more information, go through that membership roster, take a look at that, and definitely become more educated on it. Get your questions answered. Understand that the beef industry is trying to work within this subject matter in a way that's both meaningful for all of our producers and entities throughout the supply chain, and also helps us to continue to reinforce consumer confidence in the way that we produce cattle and produce beef for this country today.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time, everyone. Thank you, Ben, for the very valuable information. As a reminder, our next Animal Care Wednesday webinar is Wednesday, April 4th at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. And Beth Doran from Iowa State University is going to be talking to us about animal care considerations for bedding choice management as it relates to housing. So looking at monoslopes and confinement systems. So we hope you can join us then. It's the same link that you used today to join the webinar. And so have a great day, everyone. And again, thank you for your time, Ben.
You're welcome, everybody. Have a great day.